You're listening to Catholic Family Podcast. Episode 11.
Thanks for joining this show. I'm Kevin Davis, and I'm joined today by Dan Kramer over there from Minnesota, a guy that I've known a little bit for the last 10 years, not very much, but hoping to get a little more information about him today, talk a little bit about finances, a little bit about faith and family and fitness, and all sorts of different things that we might talk about regarding his company and, how we live our Catholic lives. Dan Kramer, thanks so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And so I have to say, I think we were together at boys camp. Boy, it has to be about 10 years ago now. And we weren't the boys. We were two of the counselors. When was that? Was that 2010-ish?
August of 2011.
11. Got it. Yep. And I think that's the only time I've ever actually met you. We've kind of hung in similar circles. Like you're in the same parish with my brother, and my brother who's a priest was up there for a bit, but you and I, we don't know each other that well.
No, and we didn't know each other too well at that boys camp either. It was just kind of in passing. But then I saw you attended a few different ordinations, I think, where you would sing in the choir. But that's about it. Yeah, I don't think I was kind of, in our emails back and forth, I was just kind of reminiscing about the different family members of yours that I met. But yeah, as far as you and I, this is definitely the most we've ever talked.
Oh, right. Well, but it's a funny thing. It's a small Catholic world, right? The traditional Catholic world is really pretty tiny. So I had a lady email me the other day about one of my other shows, and I asked her what parish she goes to, and she goes to a parish in Phoenix, Arizona. And it's like, oh, cool. Say hi to my sister down there, because my sister, who is a nun, is down in Phoenix. So it's a really a beautiful thing. That's why I'm really lucky to do this podcast, because I get to talk to people from all over the world, really, and talk about some really, really interesting things. And so today, I'm really glad to be talking to you. And I guess to start that off, we should let people know who is Dan Kramer.
So my wife and I, Leah, we grew up in Southwest Wisconsin, and as we were dating, we interviewed, kind of call it an interview, but we just bounced around to different churches, trying to kind of learn. She was a different background, more Novus Ordo, her whole family, and my family is half and half. And so through that kind of discovery phase, we found the CMRI, and then I actually was, or still am technically, a physical therapist by trade. And yeah, it's a little switch from the financial world, but I did an internship in Omaha, because they had a established church down there, and I did an internship in St. Cloud. And yeah, the St. Cloud place offered me a job a couple weeks into the internship, and it just kind of, never in a million years would I dream of living up here in Minnesota, Viking territory, coming as a Packer, as a Green Bay Packer. That was off limits.
Brett Favre went there, so I mean, you can follow his steps, right?
Right. I actually came before he did, so
okay, fair enough.
The trend. Yeah. So we just worked our way up here, and now fast forward, that was in 2000. What would that have been? 14. We moved up here, and and then as far as professionally goes, I got offered to buy those clinics I was working at for physical therapy, and realized I didn't know much about money or business or finance or any of it. So I just started reading and studying like crazy, and actually kind of fell in love with it, and started on the side doing some financial training and whatnot, with a kind of almost like an apprenticeship type setup, more so just to learn, never really dreaming of leaving a physical therapy profession that I just spent 7 years in college to get. And and then 2016 I left PT. In 2017 I started my own financial practice, and now we're already in 2021, and we really like it up in St. Cloud. There's a very strong presence, in our parish. A lot of young families, and we've my wife, I think, always in the back of her head thought we had moved back to Wisconsin, and yeah, I think we're settling in up here, and we kind of putting some roots down and bought a house. What would that have been, 2 years ago now, and getting to know a lot of people and getting to meet a lot of people through my business as well. So that kind of sums me up. My wife and I, we have 6 children. I listened to one of your previous podcasts with Michelle and Ben, and their 4 children are exactly the same age as our youngest 4 children. So
wow. Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So they came fast, and we're on round number 6, and my wife stays home, and I don't have to tell too many Catholics this, but she definitely has the harder job. I get to leave most days and go to my office, and she stays home with the children. So,
wow, 6 kids. So 6 kids. Is that 6 kids under the age of 7 or 8?
The oldest will be 9.
9. Okay.
9 this year. So he.
Wow.
But yeah, very, very close together. They came fast, and our youngest will be 1 here this month, and
wow.
Yeah.
Big families are the best. I come from a family of 10, and I mean, as the kid, obviously it's easier to say than as the parent, but I don't regret a minute of it. So that's definitely a fun time as 10 kids.
I tell people too, I can't hate on big families. I'm the 10th of 11. So
nice.
if I didn't like big families, you wouldn't be talking to me today, and nor would I be talking to you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And and there's a whole different atmosphere and a whole different feel to a big family. And I feel bad for kids, especially, kids who are by themselves, and it's obviously not their fault. And oftentimes, of course, with families, it's not always, their choice either. But I think I always think it's strange when people look down on big families. It's like, it was beautiful. It was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, not to get too off topic on today's podcast, right. But it's definitely, society is almost training these kids who eventually will be adults that, 2 is normal, 3 is a lot, and 4 is crazy. So,
right.
And it's just the programming. But I work with a lot of couples, and you'd be amazed at how many times when you get to know them after a handful of meetings or years with working them, that, they would have been open to having more kids. I mean, and it's not to say everyone has to have a lot of kids. It's just, I think it's the natural thing to, especially as a mother, to want to have kids and take care of them and stuff. So, but anywho, yeah. And
so I guess to segue, do you think there's an issue with finances? I think many people around the world, but I think a lot, especially in the US, have big problems with debt and with financial issues. And is that something that you think they've been led down by society, or is it just kind of the natural way things go in terms of how people end up spending money?
Not to be the doom and gloom on the stats, but something like 76% of people are paycheck to paycheck, and over 90% get to retirement with kind of the worry that they don't have enough. Right. So I stepped back because in 2014, at the end of that year, 2015 was when I started getting interested in finances. And from that till 2017, I was kind of training in the typical financial approach, and it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And that's why I just kept searching, and I started my own practice. And then I got with a group of mentors that just taught a little bit different process. And we teach that process to clients. And I tell people, the rules that, like, the corporations and the government and the institutions, the banks and all of them, the rules they play by are different than what they're teaching, the normal person.
Right.
And believe it or not, where have we seen that everywhere else? It's just, it seems to be a common thread, in the pharmaceutical or in the medical industry or whatever. It's just a lot of times what trickles down to you and I, we should question that, right? And it's the same exact thing with finances. It's very simply, it's there's 4 rules I tell people. The institutions, they want your money, they want it on a regular basis. Once they get it, they want to hold on to it, and then just through the products and the strategies that they teach us, they don't give it back, or if they do, they give it back slowly. So in the process, I teach people, like, that's a lot of the ways we pay our debts, a lot of the ways we invest, a lot of the ways we're taught to save. They fall within those simple rules, and and we can get into specifics or whatever, however you want to take this conversation. But it basically is, we hand over the money, and then they keep control of it, and we don't really know how or when or what's the best way to get it back. So
I think it's really fascinating you say that now, because I think it really leads into what's going on right now with the market, or was the last week. I heard that the GameStop shares all got hammered back down today, but that was a really interesting scenario that you see a bunch of people online kind of figuring out at least a small way to hit back at the big boys, the hedge funds and the banks. And that you see the big guys, the hedge funds, the banks, and even the political system kind of doing everything they can to squash it, because it's rules for them and not for us. And you see it is exactly as you say. It's a totally different set of rules, and do as they say, not as they do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that was almost, it would have been, and it still was. I mean, those hedge fund managers, like, literally billions of dollars that they lost within a matter of like a week or two. And that was a big win. But, like you say, what stepped in right away? The government's in bed with a lot of these hedge funds. So they step in and they shut down, trading capabilities and all that stuff. And that's just one specific example. But I mean, we could talk about a couple different ones, but just, think about how we pay our debts. A lot of times, simple rules, like, we're taught to focus on, how you put all your extra money towards debt. But the big picture, and I'm not saying I'm encouraging you having debt, but there's ways to pay off debt and save and kind of build yourself, instead of like spending years and years and years focusing on debt reduction. And now you get to retirement, it's like, cool, I have no debt, but I don't have any income either. So you got to go back to work, So just lots of different examples we can kind of talk through. But that GameStop one was a definite eye opener, I think, for a lot of people on like the power that the corporations and the government kind of have on our finances.
Well, and I think that, as you see, and I live in Germany now. For those of you who don't know, I think most people know that by now, but I live in Germany and obviously come from the States. And here in Germany, they have plenty of their own issues. They have much more of a social system, which has its pros and cons, honestly. When I moved here, I thought it was all bad. It was, the social system is bad, bad, bad. But then, you get into it, and for now, some of it works fairly well. But in the U.S., I really witnessed that there is this entire idea that all debt is okay. Debt is just kind of a normal part of life. And I think that, I'm sure obviously you could speak to this much better than I could, that there is some good debt. Of course, to buy a house or to go to school or whatever it is. But I think the society kind of teaches you that it's perfectly normal to be in debt for anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the big thing you kind of hit on was student loans. Like, for me, I teach people there's good debt, there's bad debt, and then there's better debt. So have you ever heard that before?
No. Yeah, go for it. Specify.
Well, I mean, debt is a huge thing that a lot of clients, it's on their when you ask them what they want to get out of the process, what they're shooting for, some of the time it's debt reduction, especially when you get into, people in their 20s and 30s and maybe in their 40s as well. But here's the thing, like, and kind of to your point, I'd like to hear more about how like Germany handles debt and stuff, but in a second, but like, to that point, like the wealthy people, and that's a whole nother mindset about, how Catholics and how Christians kind of view money. There's a lot of mindset stuff that we have to kind of talk about and overcome. But assuming they're meeting with me and they're open to the idea that becoming wealthy could be good for them because it's going to allow them to do more good with their money and stuff. Wealthy people will use debt to get more wealth. Whereas a lot of times consumers or the average person, we use debt to get things that don't build wealth. And that's always usually a bad idea. So like, bad debt, we talk about, it has high interest rates. Think of a credit card, right? It doesn't have any tax benefits, and usually the payments are pretty high for the amount of debt you have, right? So that's kind of a recipe to stay in this bad cycle. So, for those listening, definitely create strategies or game plans to pay off credit card debts and not keep that around, because it usually always leads to not having more money. But you kind of hit on like a mortgage, right? A mortgage, it has tax benefits. It's usually low payment for the amount of debt you have because the amortization schedule or the length of your debt is longer. And what was the other one? And then lower interest rate, right? Especially today, you can lock in at like 2.5 interest, So that would be what I'd call good debt. And then what do you think would be like even a better debt, if there was such a thing?
Ooh, I mean, I guess so. No mortgage, no college. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, I just, this idea that, cool, what if you could get a loan at 2%, the payment's really low, and then you can go take that debt and invest or do something smart with it and earn 10%, right? So better debt is when basically you can control the asset, control the money, and have somebody else pay off the debt. And this is this whole concept of leverage. And now there's a lot of education that we're gonna get into over time with these clients. But once they understand that, like, we don't want to be afraid of debt. We just want to be smart with it. You're not going to go borrow and max out your credit card to invest that because, it's risky. There's no tax benefits, and your payment's going to be enormous. And if the investment goes bad or something, you're going to be in trouble, right? So that might have been not a great example, but that's kind of what we teach people with debt specifically, but not like we jumped on here just to talk about debt, but that is a pretty common concern.
Yeah, right. And it makes sense. I mean, over here, I'd say, as you mentioned, it's a little different that obviously there's social education. So people aren't getting $100,000 in debt for an education. So people are paying much higher taxes. The healthcare is much better too. Social healthcare is much better that it's still a decent part of your income, but you're not paying these huge out-of-pocket fees when you go to the doctor. It's pretty much taken care of outside of your monthly payments. And I would say the biggest one that I see is that people are not spending above their means in terms of buying cars. And other I mean, cars really sticks out to me. When you go to America, you see people driving just unbelievable cars, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 cars, and then you drive with them to their flat, their apartment, and it's kind of run down in the middle of nowhere, and you see that all of their money, anything that they ever get, is going into their car, and it's kind of a strange idea, I think. And here, that's just not the same.
Yeah. So over there, when you say social, like a social government, is it more like socialism, would you say?
It is. It's a social democratic system. So there is still, like, the healthcare system is not purely social. There's also privatized healthcare.
Okay.
The rich people primarily on privatized healthcare because it's better care, and you have, I guess you can have lower fees, especially if you're younger, et cetera. But I guess what you lose is that you're spending a lot of your tax money and whatnot on the healthcare system. But even then, I think it's not that much more than in the U.S. And honestly completely understand why the U.S. healthcare system is so brutal and it's so expensive. I don't honestly really understand what is so much better here than over there. I haven't quite been able to put my finger on it, but something's better for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I'll be honest. I'm kind of lacking on my cultural, education on other countries. I mean, I listen to other podcasts and this and that, but as far as Germany, I'm very, I would say, uneducated on what their stands are. I have a friend that is from Norway, and she was saying they're a little more of like a socialism country as well, where a lot of the college and a lot of the healthcare is paid for with higher taxes. And she was complimenting it as well. I mean, I think her family still lives over there, so it's just interesting, and that's a whole nother conversation too, to get into like the medical industry and the pharmaceutical
for sure
domination. Well, I would say,
and I guess like you were saying earlier, I mean, I guess the big thing, and I'm sure this is what people go to you for, is to go to you for a different mindset. They go to you and say, okay, well, what are we doing wrong? I assume, I mean, or what can we do better? And if not wrong, and I think that that's what helps anybody, is to open your mind a little bit to different ideas. If it's good debt or whatever it is. I think that's obviously important in any aspect of culture, at least.
Yeah. And so we can jump into a little bit of what I do. Like, I think I just wanted, like, there's a bad stigma in the US with financial advisors, right? And I get it. And I was like, if I'm going to be in this industry and I'm going to be here for a while, like, I need to figure out how to change that. Like, I don't want to be the guy, you see my number come up on the phone and that, let's not answer that. Like, so from the get-go, I'm like, how do we make more of an impact and add more value for people so they're excited when you come around, and I feel like it's getting that way. Like I work with a good chunk of our parish up here, a lot of word of mouth referrals and stuff. And it's my goal in my practice is to just provide education, not to tell people what to do. In the process, we'll look at every possible thing they have in their finances, and we build out what I call their current position. There's no sales. There's nothing even to talk about until we get real clear on what they're doing, right? And then we start testing. I'll start showing them, hey, based on how you're handling your debt, or based on how you're investing, or based on your insurance coverages and your auto and home and everything, even in stuff I'm not selling them, I'll teach them how maybe there's holes in their model, or how they're at risk of losing money. And when you start teaching people how to recover money that they're just on track to lose, that sets you apart really fast, right? Because most of the time, I don't know what your experience has been, but you sit down and they say, well, this proposal is better than your proposal and you should move your money over. And it's all focused on your money as far as like your potential to grow money, but they're very rarely are you getting the education on how to, protect and recapture losses to guarantee that you're going to make it,
Right.
So it's a different process. And, thankfully, I would say 80% or more of the people I meet are referrals, right? Which tells me hopefully I'm on the right track with something, because they're telling their friends to talk to me. Right. So that's a big thing. I did want to touch on one thing you said over there with the cars, right? Yeah. So one thing, like, I just had a client buy a vehicle, and it was $30,000-$40,000. And I was kind of chuckling when you're saying that, but it wasn't to have, like, if you can teach a whole different mindset of like, cool, what if that vehicle literally could save you money by buying it, right? And that was the conversation I had with them last year. I'm like, well, next year possibly we got to talk about, you told me on your wish list the things you actually wanted to get. You said you need to upgrade the vehicle. I said, what's your game plan? Well, that's when you can start tying in like tax recovery, tax dollars. So there's in the US, I don't know the German tax code or anything, but in the US, if you buy a vehicle that's so heavy, believe it or not, the government, and if you set it up, in such a way, the government will let you write off, like get a tax deduction for the value of your vehicle.
Wow.
That's about the remark I get from most people. They don't hear these things. So a lot of times, and that's back to that consumerism, right? We're not taught how to play kind of like how the big corporations and the government plays, right? When these big companies, think of like a construction company, whenever they buy equipment, they're buying that to write off their taxes, right? Yeah, they might need the equipment, and hopefully it helps them be more profitable and everything, but it's also a tax write-off. Well, what if we could teach like the average American to not just buy to be a consumer and have that money leave your life and never come back, but buy with like intention, right? So like they bought this vehicle and it actually saved them money over the next few years. So
interesting.
Just kind of fun. When you start adding that value, like it gets fun to have these conversations. So anyhow, what's
well, and I think that's a good idea that you're playing. I mean, play their game, because I mean the rules are definitely stacked against the normal man right now. Now, at least in as far as we understand the rules. So like you said, if you can find a way to pick apart these rules and find a way to win, I mean, again, like this GameStop Reddit issue, that I think you find these little niches, these little ways to, hey, look, if this is how the system is, then this is how we should use it. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it gets really fun. And, another big thing, like your typical advisor, they might say, well, let's sit down and set up like a 30-year plan, right? If anybody sat down with anybody, they might have heard that, like, we're going to set up a 30-year plan. Well, I tell people from the get-go, like, dude, we don't know what tomorrow brings, let alone 5 or 10 or 30 years, right? Mm-hmm. So like the model and the process I take you through, we want to be as efficient today as we can with all of our dollars. And every year or 6 months when I meet up with you, we update your info, we build out your model, and then at that time what can we be as efficient as possible today. So I tell people, instead of like a 30-year plan, it might be more like 31-year plans, right?
Right.
And in doing that, like, there is going to be more wealth built always, but you're also going to lower your risk, and and I focus a lot on cash flow, right? Cash flow is kind of the money that travels through your life, right? Do you guys have like 401ks over there?
Yeah, equivalent. Yeah.
What's it called over there? Is it the same thing or?
Oh, something in German. I couldn't even tell you, but they have similar. Yeah.
I mean, and the reason I bring that up is a lot of people, they understand like, what a 401k is. And it's this idea that, it's a retirement account at work, right?
Right.
And, they might even put some money in, your boss might, and then you put money in, and over time you hope that number grows really big. And I'm not saying I'm not against them. We have rules that I'll teach people, and we tell people if they're going to give you a free match, yeah, maybe contribute up to the match. But money above and beyond that, like, this is one example. I told you those 4 rules that they teach us. They want your money. They want to hold on to it. Or they want it regularly. They want to hold on to it. And then when you go to get it back, they want to give it back slowly. Right. So are you familiar with like a 401k?
Ish.
So the very generic thing is you put money in and you don't have to pay taxes on those contributions at that time. And then it stays in this account until you're 60 years old, 59 and a half, or whatever they could change that too. They might make it so you can't take the money out till you're 70, right? Which would change a lot of people's retirement. But so essentially you're putting money into this account. You can't touch it until you're retired. They get to make all the rules. They get to tell you when you can have it back. And the big reason people put it in there is a tax savings, they're told, right?
Right.
Because the money goes in. But, and this might be getting a little nerdy, I apologize, but like the reality is if you put money in there and then tax rates go up when you go to take it out in 20 or 30 years, did you save any money? Because then when you go to take it out later and you got to actually pay higher taxes, you know, that falls into those 4 rules because they had control of the money the whole time. And when you go to get it back, now there's a level of risk that if taxes went up, you actually have to pay more money on that, on the dollars that grew in there.
Right.
So anyway, that might got a little nerdy, but that's one example we teach people is, you know, and then the cash flow, you know, even if that money in that 401k gets really high, which we hope it does, right? It's not paying you every month, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
You're not getting any cash flow from it. So from your 30s to your 60s, you're locking yourself out of the use of that money. So therefore you still have to go to work every day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which I'm not, right. I think people should work hard, but a lot of times on people's wish list, they go, well, it'd be real cool to maybe retire a little early or be able to take a little more time off of work and travel or whatever they want to do. But you can kind of see how the typical rules are locking them out of their chance of ever making that happen. Right.
Right. Well, and I think it's an interesting thing too. Again, kind of comparing the societies, and in Germany, I don't necessarily know about that specifically, but here in Germany, your average vacation days, you usually get about 30 days off per year, you know, for just working at an average company. And as I'm sure we both know, in the US, it's about 10, probably, I think 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty incredible thing that I think that in America, I never thought differently ever. It never crossed my mind that was unusual. And when you come here, it's kind of like, how do people live like that? I mean, and how is that okay that you really have very little time to actually do anything but work? And I think it's a real problem.
100%. And, you know, we didn't get into the 4 F's much, but the 4 F's, that's the reason I started that podcast. And I didn't come up with the 4 F's. One of my mentors taught me, but the 4 F's, it talks about faith, family, fitness, and finance. And so in that order of priorities, that's the goal, right? We, you know, number one, we don't want to compromise our faith for anything, right? Because life on earth here is short, eternity is long. Okay, so keep that front in mind. But then after that, you know, our family, well, think about what you just said. We get 10 days off in America. So literally probably like 75% of your time while you're awake is away from your family.
Right.
Every day, all day, you know. And the reality too is what I find is when you're away that long, even your time off, you don't have time to really let your brain rest till your brain is still at work. So the family's suffering by not having their parents home more, you know, or having the actual option to be home more. So anyway, family is super important. That's second on the list. Fitness, you know, in the financial world, you see this a lot. You know, maybe they did do well for themselves. They have a lot of money, they retire, and then next month they have a heart attack and die. Right. And it's kind of doom and gloom. I know, but it happens. So that priority comes before finances. It's like you got to take care of yourself mentally and physically. You know, otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of taking a really high paying job when you know the stress is probably going to give you a heart attack? You know,
right.
So just keeping that front of mind. And then finance is fourth. It's the 4th F. And I just tell people, you know, you don't have to be afraid of getting wealthy if you have your priorities in order, because the finances, having more of them, is just going to allow you to do the first 3 things better. Right. So that's the whole reason. Same thing. I want to keep it front and center in my mind too. And that's why we kind of created a buddy of mine down in Nashville who used to be a physical therapist as well. And now he's in the financial world with me. We talk all the time. So he's the co-host with me on that podcast.
And what's that podcast called?
It's the 4F Forum. So we talk about, a lot of finance topics, but we try to mix in the other F's as well. And then we'll bring on guests as well at times. So just you know.
And is that weekly, or how often do you do that?
Yeah, every week we release a podcast.
Cool.
Yep.
Nice. I'll definitely link to that in the show notes to this show, because that sounds interesting. I have to confess, I have not listened to it yet, but I definitely will check that out.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun. We just told ourselves, even if we don't get any listeners, we want to follow through on what we said we're going to do. And I think like 2 years ago, we talked about this idea of doing it. And so we finally, I think, started it like last September. So it's moving along. I mean, you're probably, when did you start your podcast?
I started, I think, early December, mid-December, sometime in December.
Okay. And not to talk too much there, but like what was the reasoning? Or because I've been listening to all of your podcasts. They're kind of really good content. So what?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a good question. Part of it was I heard a couple episodes of the True Restoration podcast, which is primarily Bishop Sanborn, Bishop Dolan, a guy called Stephen Heiner, and many other people, but it's not CMRI. It's kind of the other side of the traditional Catholics in the U.S. and they have some very good content as well. I highly recommend True Restoration. As I also say, True Restoration is kind of high school through your doctorate, while my podcast is more third grade through ninth grade. So it's a much different level, which is okay. I'm totally fine with that. But I listened to some of their podcasts, and it just kind of struck me at one point that there's just not much good media in the world. I mean, there's so many lies and so much untruth and disgusting shows and news, and it just disgusted me. And I think I just decided, okay, you know what? I'm gonna sit down and try my best to create something of my own and create good, positive things. And that was another thing, that I was really sick of only ever talking about the coronavirus. Like everywhere I went, anyone I talked to, it was just Corona, just all the time. And I'm sure you have that. And it makes sense, because it totally has taken over our world, in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And so that's all we ever talked about, all I ever heard. And I just like, you know what? I'm so sick of it. I think people need to hear normal things again. They need to hear about other things rather than just the stupid coronavirus, and how sad it is for everyone, and our lives are miserable. And so I wanted to create something with a little more hope and a little more positivity, and I think that's the aim, is to keep people a little more positive in these times they're bad, but there have been plenty of other bad times in history that we've gotten through.
I love it. No, yeah, I would say you're accomplishing that, so keep up the good work there.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, as I tell everyone too, I mean, I'm really fortunate. I mean, I just get to have cool conversations with people from all over the world, and that's not kidding. I mean, it's not that much work. It's enough work that it keeps me busy, a couple hours a week, and I get to talk to you here in Minnesota and talk to priests in Germany and the US. It's very cool. Yeah. No complaints.
Cool. Yeah. No, that's, I mean, to our podcast as well, it's the same thing. It's getting good information out there, and we hope we're accomplishing that. But it's negativity sells, so that's what the mainstream that's what the mainstream pushes, is because it raises their ratings. And unfortunately, It's to the point where they've even sacrificed, making sure it's truthful, as long as the ratings go up.
Exactly. Well, in truth, but also the attention span for so many people is now about 10 seconds. And so I've had some people, kind of warn me and say, hey, Kevin, I don't know if anyone's actually going to listen to your podcast, or not many people. You're not going to get many views because your shows are too long. And I'm like, I don't care. I mean, I would rather get good views and people who actually listen and who actually care, rather than, someone who just needs their 10-second fill of interesting information. And so I think, and I'm sure your show is doing that too. And I hope people go from this show and go check yours out again in the link, and I'll check it out too, because we need to support each other there too. I think we need to support Catholic companies like yours. We need to support Catholic media, because there's not much of it. And so for anyone doing it, I think, go out there and promote this stuff and help these people, and go do your own. I've mentioned this in other podcasts. For anyone listening, find your own niche. You don't have to be able to do a podcast like me and Dan. I mean, go and What doesn't matter. I mean, like I said, one thing you can really do is find these old books on eBay and scan them online. Make sure there's no copyright and put them online. That's a beautiful contribution to the Catholic media movement.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I was listening to maybe your podcast with Andy. You were talking about supporting other Catholics, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something like the Jewish population, it's estimated that they do 90% of their business with other Jewish business owners. And it was something, there was like 3 other cultures, and they were all very intentional about supporting their own people. And it said something like the Christian population, it's less than 15%. And in the article, it was talking about, we almost feel like it's a weird thing, but it's almost like, your cousin or your brother or your family member or someone from your church comes out saying they're starting this business. And it's almost like we look at them like, yeah, they're going to fail. We'll just support them enough to watch them crash and burn, and then when they finally make it out of it, it's like, then they might go support them. But there's not, and I'm not saying this is true for everybody, but
right.
But there's not this like desire to throw your support at them to help them right out the gates in the Christian community. And that's a little bit my goal, if you dig down as to like my why and what I do with businesses and stuff, it is the growth of, our church, the parish we go to especially, but then stemming from there. So it's like, I think if more people get more comfy with money and just all of the conversations around it, I think that will also help, and not be so like tight with their money, but more giving and can be intentional about where they direct it as well. So
that's exactly right. And I mean, if it's investing or if it's spending, if it's whatever it is, just be smart. So that's why, I mean, we're competitive shows here, but okay, not competitive. We're on the same, well, how do I want to say this? We're running different lines in the same direction, I guess. I want to show people that the right things to spend their money on, not spending on Amazon and Netflix and Starbucks. And you're trying to show them exactly where to spend it. So if anyone's listening, listen to me first for where not to put your money, and then go to Dan for where to put your money. We can work a good little working relationship here with our podcast. But Dan, I think that's a great place to end it today. I seriously, I would love to have you on. I think we didn't even touch on even remotely all the topics I would like to, but I think we're about 45 minutes. So I think I would love to have you back. I'd love to talk more in detail about any of the topics that we talked about today. But I really enjoyed it. I will definitely attach your company link and your podcast link. And please, anyone listening to this, if you have money worries or questions or anything, go contact Dan. Wouldn't you rather do it with a traditional Catholic who we can know and trust than with anybody else? I'm sure he will give you some very good help. And I already learned something here in 45 minutes. Several things.
I appreciate your time today, Kevin. Thank you for asking me on.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And we'll have you back. And until then, God bless.
Thank you.